Hello, good morning, good afternoon to in-house counsel and in-house legal professionals from North America and from the world. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunch time with us, and special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Sirian, and our fantastic presenters today, Heidi Stenberg, Kanti Prabha, and Gordon Thomspon, who are going to teach us about Generative AI in contract lifecycle management, a guide for in-house counsel. We have a wonderful program, and I'm going to turn it over to Gordon Thomspon, who will be the moderator today. Gordon is the Executive Vice President of Pre-Sales and Business Strategy at Sirian, where he leads the global pre-sales and solutions consulting teams. Gordon is an accomplished pre-sales leader with 29 years experience in the enterprise software and SaaS application space. So Gordon, Heidi, and Kanti, welcome to In-House Connect, and I'll turn things over to Gordon to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Shai, and a great introduction. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, regardless of where you're at. I'm super excited about this topic today. I think this is something that you can't open up your internet browser today or open up a magazine, if people still do that, and not see something related to this topic. So super excited about that. Let's just move to the next slide, please. So just by way of introductions, Kanti Prabha. Kanti is the co-founder and president of Sirian. Kanti is an experienced startup and growth professional who's excited by solving complex problems with the ability to find structure in chaos. She's passionate about the contract management space and its ability to positively impact relationships between organizations. Welcome, Kanti. Next is Heidi Stenberg. Heidi is the E&Y Law Global and America's Legal Transformation Solutions Leader. Congratulations, Heidi. I understand so congratulations on the promotion.
Gordon.
Draws from over 20 years of experience in legal services to guide corporate legal departments and law firms in transforming the business of practicing law. She brings vast knowledge in creating solutions that align processes, staffing models, and digital technologies to help drive cost-effective, sustainable, and innovative legal function operations. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you, Gordon.
Very good. So let's go to the next slide. So before we get into the Sirian piece, Heidi, I'd like for you to maybe give us a brief introduction of EY Law and your organization.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Gordon. Really excited to be here today. Really fascinating to see the chat and all the participation. So hello, everyone. I'm excited to share some market perspectives, of course, about contracting. But before we do, I thought I would share just a little bit about our practice, some of the perspective I'll be sharing. So as Gordon mentioned, I am part of our EY Law practice. At EY, we have a large global multidisciplinary practice that's focused on legal service delivery. We focus our solutions on sector, and we really traverse a broad array of solutions from the practice of law as well as business enablement. We operate the business across 90 jurisdictions, and so a very large global enterprise. And our practice groups focus on specific areas that, I think are of greatest interest to our clients. We have a digital law team that focuses on responsible AI, data privacy, a very evolving area of the law. We also help organizations around corporate reorganizations, sustainability matters, entity compliance, as well as workforce and employment. And specific to contracting, we really operate end to end. So we help organizations really think through how to transform their operations as well as operate them most effectively. So I know we're going to spend the bulk of today on technology and how that's disrupting things. So with that, Kanti, I'll pass to you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Very quickly, let me give you an overview of Sirian. We've been around for 10 years and counting. Sirian is a contract lifecycle management product which has more than 200 global enterprise brands managing its contracts across 70 countries around the world. Our teams are spread globally, and one of the things that we pride ourselves on is being highly customer focused. And one of the two elements that differentiate us in the CLM space is our AI native posture. We believe that AI should be infused and embedded into all aspects of contract management, risk in contracting, authoring, and the ability to look at your contracts in a much more deeper way. And then, of course, the ability to govern contracts once they are signed is also a key differentiator. It's a wonderful topic today to be talking about the role of GenAI in contract lifecycle management, and what a great audience. So look forward to getting started.
Very good. Thank you, Kanti. So here are the three topics that we hope to achieve today. One is what GenAI for CLM really is and what it really does. Secondly, what you should look out for when it comes to AI in general. A lot of people are doing evaluations and just don't have the skill sets or the staff to help guide those evaluations. Thirdly is how to take the next step on your AI journey. So those are the three topics that we want to cover today. But before we get started, I want to just bring up a couple of stats. I don't think I need to do this, but obviously you want to have some type of provocation to start the conversation. And as I said at the beginning of this, generative AI is all over the press, and companies are really investing heavily in it and doing a lot of research and understanding, how it's going to help them or hurt them with adopting this technology. And so I looked up a few articles. The two that I landed on, one came from The Economist, and it's the title is Generative AI Could Radically Alter the Practice of Law, and it came out June 6, 2023. And it says, according to a recent report from Goldman Sachs, 44% of legal tasks could be performed by AI, more than any occupation surveyed except for clerical and administrative support. So that's certainly one point of view. The other article that I looked at was from World Economic Forum, which is Jobs of Tomorrow, Large Language Models and Jobs, which came out in September 2023. It says the Future of Jobs reports found that in 2023, that 23% of global jobs will change in the next 5 years due to generative AI. And the report also found that 75% of survey responders reporting having plans to adopt AI in their organizations, and 62% report having plans to adopt text, image, and voice processing technology. So very clearly, this is going to have an impact on the legal practices around the world. Heidi, I know EMY's also done a lot of research on this. Are there any kind of stats that you'd like to produce or talk about?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that, Gordon. I share your view that, it's not a day doesn't pass where you're not seeing this in the market, and tremendous amount of research and investments that are happening. I think, to build on what you shared, I think I also am seeing some studies that look at the problems that Gen AI is certainly, going to solve for us, and where we see a lot of, at the highest level, CEOs, boards really focusing on things like risk management, reducing costs, revenue growth, digitization ways of working. And so, we see a lot of statistics in particular that show Gen AI simply disrupting and accelerating really each of those agendas. One stat that caught my attention in particular, we were looking at how, law firms as well as in-house teams are really thinking about how to deploy Gen AI and what some of the first use cases that are really kind of leaving proof of concept stage into enterprise deployment. And not surprisingly, over 70% of the in-house team said contract drafting specifically is one that they're looking at very closely. They think it's very primed to bring that acceleration. So I think there's so much excitement. I think we're going to see a lot of activity, particularly in the CLM space relative to Gen AI as a use case. So I know we're going to dive deeper into that today, but very exciting.
It is very, very exciting. So I guess, not belabor this point too much, but obviously the bottom line on this is, there's Gen AI certainly is the next technology disruptor in the software space. There's been a lot of studies on the impact of generative AI on the workforce with varying results. But the bottom line is we're in the early stages of the hype curve, and the true answers, I think, are still yet to be discovered. So lots of things to explore here today, and I'm excited about this conversation. We want to start off with kind of myths versus realities, and this almost feels like a game show, but it's not. And we're going to start with probably the one that's burning in everyone's mind. Go ahead and build out a little bit. So this is for you, Heidi. Will generative AI replace the role of lawyers?
Yes, that's the hot topic, the hot question. I think the short answer is, not really, but in a way, yes. And I'll explain that specifically. I think that just to reflect on, the past, I would say 1.5 to 2 years, we've been talking to in-house legal teams around AI, transformation. This, when you bring this topic up, particularly in insight sessions and really strategy sessions where they're thinking about their operating models, there's a range of emotions in this space. There's reactions that there's a real excitement, curiosity around what this technology will bring. There's a real concern and some natural skepticism. But I think ultimately what I'm seeing a lot of, particularly the in-house legal teams, and I know that's our audience primarily today, is that there's an ultimate recognition that, data unlocks time. And I think that is so powerful for the teams to really realize. And, let's be honest, what's more valuable than time is a commodity. And so really embracing that. And what we're working with teams now to really think through is, how do you make sure the human is in the loop in these processes at the right times, the right place, that the data is really accelerating. And I think in summary, organizations that are getting it right, Gordon, are the ones that are, they're thinking about optimizing the process and portions of the process, but they're making sure that the human is not only in the loop, but empowered by the technology. And so lawyers that are getting educated and thinking about that likely will outpace lawyers that are not. And I think that's an important takeaway on the people side.
No, that's fantastic. Great insight. The second myth that we'd like to discuss is existing contracting processes need to be of high maturity level to leverage generative AI technology. Heidi, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that that's also probably a myth as well. I mean, I think it can seem like, you're, looking up at Everest and it's a big mountain you have to climb when you think about a CLM transformation. But a lot of the organizations that we're working with, they're at varying degrees of maturity. Some are just really developing. Some they are more mature and they have some of the probably early generation tools. But for the organizations in particular that are just getting started, I think they have this incredibly unique opportunity to almost skip what we would describe as a generation of change, to think through how they'll use this next gen technology. They have to work, to get up to speed. And we'll talk a little bit about how we see organizations getting started. But I think that if they work very intentionally from aligning, policies to data models to ways of working internally, a lot of the governance is really a model for success. So I think the short answer is no. I mean, you don't have to have very advanced capabilities, but you have to start thinking around how you're going to work together, most likely as an integrated team internally.
Fantastic. No, that's great insight. So Kanti, let's pivot over to more the technology side. So out of the box, large language models can be used for all CLM use cases. What are your thoughts on that?
In my mind, that's definitely a myth. The key reason is very large language models, they're different. Each model is different. Every model is an expert in different areas. When we look at different CLM use cases, our research tells us that different models excel in different parts of contract lifecycle management. Certain models are very good at generating red lines. Other models, smaller models, actually are much better at extracting information. Smaller models are also much more conducive to being fine-tuned and trained, which many other large models do not either allow for training, or they are so big that it's very expensive to fine-tune them. And last, in this particular myth is that it's not just about having a large language model which solves CLM use cases. Large language models need to be combined with existing powerful B-based small and medium language models, and the combination is very powerful. So it's important not to rely on one model and then put all eggs in that basket, because models are changing. There are new models trumping older models every day, and it is important to have a multi-model approach and a research lab that allows you to keep benchmarking different models against each other, and an architecture that allows you to plug and play different models, whichever one starts performing better.
Yeah, no, that's great insight, Kanti. And I think the combination of using your NLPs and small language models, medium language models, definitely makes a lot of sense. We got a question online. We may have skipped too fast into the tech session, but would you mind taking maybe 10 seconds to explain what a large language model is? Because I think for people that don't live the AI world, that might be a new terminology for them.
Absolutely. So a large language model, just by name of its nomenclature, is trained on very large volumes of unadulterated, untrained data. This could be, data from the internet. This could be large, number of papers, websites, documents, which are publicly available. And the idea is for the model to develop a brain based on all of this data that it sees in order to generally understand and develop an understanding of different concepts. Some are generic concepts, some could be very, specific contractual concepts. And so the large language model is literally sitting on a very large volume of data, being trained by natural language processing, and knows how to interpret and answer questions if you put a chatbot on top of it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you for that explanation, Kanti. So let's go to the last myth here. And this is something that I think we're still exploring just as a technology disruptor does. But like as companies and organizations are evaluating generative AI technologies, and we talked about large language models, natural language processing models, et cetera, how are companies going to manage the security of these models as they're using them?
There's definitely a way. It's not impossible to manage security with GenAI. The right architecture, in the right choice of models, the complete transparency of how data is being used, and where does the data go into the model, where does the model sit, who governs the model, all of these elements need to be factored in. But a robust, auditable architecture for anything AI, which can be demonstrated to IT departments in an easy manner, should be able to remove any security gaps that we today associate with GenAI.
Okay, fantastic. No, that's great insight as well. So just definitely something that everyone should be thinking about as we're going down this path, because there's a lot of different technologies that are popping up every day, literally, and security is definitely something everyone should be aware of. Let's move to, I think we're going to take a poll now. So Shai, if you could pop it up. So the poll is, in which areas of contracting do you believe generative AI could provide the most significant improvements for your legals teams? I'll give it here a second. While we're waiting, Heidi, any guesses from your side?
As I'm watching the results come in, definitely drafting, I would say that we see that a lot. I mentioned that earlier, but the risk management and compliance monitoring, particularly when we're working with not only legal teams as well as procurement teams and just the business overall, looking at the life and health of a contract, I would say that's also probably more of an emerging area, post-execution, things like that. But it looks as the results come in, we see drafting and review and negotiation. So those are definitely, as two of the front runners, probably not a surprise.
Yeah. Kanti, any thoughts on the numbers that are popping up?
I would put my bet on contract drafting for sure, because the whole concept of generative AI is the ability to generate content, the ability to help you write, the ability to help you understand, interpret, and then convert it into language. And I feel that it's one of the most time-taking business critical parts of the contract life cycle, and second, very generative. So that's where my bet is on.
Nice. It looks like the entries are slowing down, so I think we can put a stick in it. But 34% for contract review and negotiation, 30% for drafting, 19% for risk management, and then workflows and approvals, 17%. So great feedback. Thanks for everyone participating in the poll. Let's move to the next slide. So I think this next section is we've kind of we've stated the problem. Now let's pivot into what some of the use cases are that we're seeing for generative AI specific to contract lifecycle management. So Kanti, I'm going to ask you maybe to start addressing some of the use cases, and then Heidi, I'll have you, once we go through some of the use cases, give your feedback from an EY perspective and what your guys are seeing with your clients as well.
Absolutely. So here is, the art of the possible. What could GenAI mean to CLM? This is use case number one. Very interesting. You have a corpus of 100,000 contracts, 1 million contracts. You have contracts of all types. The ability to talk to your set of contracts is the focus of the first use case. So let's say, you have 500,000 contracts, you want to dig deeper. The question here is, which arm of my contracts or suppliers have ESG protections built into the contract? ESG being as critical as topic as GenAI. You get into it, but the system is not just giving you, or should not just give you, here are your contracts with, ESG or words related to ESG. But what if it could understand what you're asking for and then prompt you with, is this what you're looking for? Is this also what you want to do? Is this the next step in the contract life cycle that you would like to take? And really, participate in the search with you as an equal participant, giving you suggestions. And this comes from the intelligence that a large language model or a fine-tuned model can provide to you. So a very potent use case is the ability to talk to your contracts and talk to it in a very interactive manner, as opposed to just a simple search. The next use case, which I think we all would really, benefit from, is the ability for not just looking at a contract and understanding what's in it, but understanding the risk it carries, understanding how strong or weak is this particular contract in different forms of risk, financial risk, compliance, risk, ESG protections, and so on and so forth. And if we could have the contract be scrutinized from all those different perspectives and give you back, a score and show you exactly what is risky and what is not when compared to your role in that contract, that is again a very powerful use case. And the third, of course, which is the ability to write contracts, the ability to look at a contract and know what's working for you, what's not working for you, the ability to highlight why is a particular clause or sentence in a contract risky or not as per your company's provisions, and be able to tell you what the alternatives are. And not just red line, but explain the red line, explain why that red line is needed and why is it important. Explainable assistance in drafting, negotiations, review of contracts, very powerful use case, I feel, is one of the key areas of research happening almost everywhere.
Yep, good. So Heidi,
No.
what are you guys seeing with your E&Y prospects and customers? Are these use cases in line with what people are asking you guys to also provision and deliver?
They definitely are. I thought that was an excellent summary by Kanti. I would say, we see it very similarly, and maybe just to draw on a perspective from the advisor side, when we help to build out a framework for an organization, for a legal team, working with other parts of the enterprise, we think about it similarly and probably in a framework style. And I could talk a little bit about what that looks like, and then also highlighting some of the readiness activities to make even happen impossible, right? What Kanti describes. So that's where we're really working with a lot of organizations on planning, design, and readiness. But we think about it in a framework in 3 parts. So using the GenAI for gathering, acting, and advising. So I think that touches on really all the examples that Kanti described. From a gathering perspective, certainly agree with Kanti. We'll have examples where legal teams are just wanting to, look for a certain subset of agreements with certain types of criteria. But to her point, it's smarter than just the traditional search. But to make that happen, we're seeing a lot of innovation on, a very thoughtful data model behind the scenes in terms of all those risk elements and thinking about what needs to actually be flagged for search, as well as just the health of, the clauses, the clause bank, but even before that, thinking about your template structure and how that all will happen. It can be magical and transformation is realized, but there's a lot that has to happen to get it to the point where, you're implementing it in that way and you can interrogate it in that way. When we look at acting, definitely agree with Kanti that, that's where we're helping a lot of automation through drafting agreement with certain clause language, templates, but there's more alertness and immersive integration with the system. So there are alerting clauses that might need your attention to Kanti's point. It's smart, it's recognizing when deviations have occurred, it's understanding that in the background. And then finally, advising. I think that's where you'll head in terms of having really dynamic summations of the data that they otherwise would not have. And so we see a lot of legal teams in particular, building this type of capability into their business cases, which we'll talk about later in the session, the ROI that will bring, the efficiencies that will bring. But these are just some, I think, really concrete examples of transformation that can be realized. And going into deploying a technology, then you have to think about all the process, the op model, the technology that works together to accomplish that.
No, that's fantastic. So we had a couple of questions. I'm going to take a couple just now, and then we'll move on to the next section. But John had a question. I think this is more towards you, Kanti. Does AI have the capability to extrapolate a contract's counterparty's interests from the contract text or edits that they propose? For example, will it anticipate the counterparty's rationale as it's determining the risk associated with that contract?
Very much, and to varied degrees of accuracy. And when I say varied degrees of accuracy, if you use a vanilla out of the box, large language model, it will do a generic, understanding of the language and probably tell you, is this supplier friendly? Is this customer friendly?
Yeah.
If you in fact train a vanilla out of the box model and make it into a foundational model, which is trained with pristine, thousands of examples of contract data, and tell it how to interpret contract data as opposed to, treat it as any other piece of language, the results are even more promising. And then if you can extend it further to introduce concepts of playbooks, where you tell it what is good for a supplier, what is not good for a supplier, what is good for a customer, what is not good for a customer, and systems which have that inbuilt fine-tuning training, where contract lifecycle management systems that work hard at doing that third level of fine-tuning, where it is really not only telling you how to read a contract, but how to interpret a contract based on the role that is being played by a particular party, and what is good, what is far away in the spectrum. Those give much more powerful results. So definitely, with the right models in place, with the right training on these models and strong fine-tuning, these models can give you a view of what is the counterparty thinking, how near or far are they from you, and what is the permutation combination of the different elements the counterparty has introduced. But there's work to be done, and I think it also feeds into the question that that Kathleen asked, that what is the work that a customer needs to do. If you choose right, the CLM product should do a large part of that work for you. But your company's secret sauce, in terms of what works for you and what doesn't, that is the part you contribute. Because 30-day payment terms could be great for one organization, but others may live with 45, and some may just live with 15, and that is the ask of their business. And that's a very simple example I'm giving, but if you extrapolate that to much more complex legal concepts, those are the type of inputs that you would definitely want to give, but you would want to give them in a very secure manner, and that is why you'd want to make sure that the solution is secure.
So Kanti, if I were to read between the lines, it sounds like the choice of your technology that you're going to use for CLM will determine how much time it takes and what kind of results you're going to get back from generative AI, and what you have to do out of the box, and what you have to actually train and spend time doing.
Absolutely. I think the harder the technology works, the customers can benefit from that, and all customers can benefit from how the system is trained over time.
All right, very good. Excellent questions. Thanks everyone for asking questions. Let's move forward kind of to the next section, which is the way forward. So let's take a couple of questions here. Heidi, how can the organization assess whether generative AI and CLM is a must-have or a nice-to-have for their organization?
No, thanks for that, Gordon. I think that if you study, particularly from a legal perspective, I would say similar use cases that have followed this path. I think that we're all going to find that having generative AI and just automation in your CLM platform is table stakes now. I mean, I think if you want to look at going to market, selecting a tool for all the reasons that Kanti outlined, I like to draw some parallels. If we, particularly those of you who've worked in litigation or the document review era, you wouldn't think of doing a large scale document review without technology assisted review, AI, certainly CCLM following the same arc and path. And so I think the legal sector is disrupting that in the marketplace. There's so many more options, are the possible options that really weren't there, let's say 5 or 8 years ago, a lot of venture capital coming into this arena. But outside of that, I think, one thing to note that we're seeing is that at the enterprise level, so it's the kind of top down, if you will, within a given organization, there's a lot of GenAI working groups, think tanks, strategies, policies where, you'll be really questioned when you come to do a tech rationalization or a tech selection that you don't have certain capabilities that meet those standards that are being set within the organization. So we're seeing a lot of legal teams, wear two hats. They're enabling their functions with AI, particularly in contracting, and then they're also really looking at just responsible AI policies broadly. So it's a really unique place for a lot of the in-house teams to be. I think it's really exciting. But, to be clear, I think it definitely will be the standard and one that will be expected to be seen internally.
And so is your opinion, Heidi, that we're kind of in that now, or is this a future?
Yeah, I think we are. We're living it now, which I think is really exciting, to see this evolution. And, I sit in a role where I get to work across sectors in a global role. And so I'm seeing a lot of real great innovation across sectors. So I can observe where probably a lot of our more regulated clients, the banking, financial markets clients, life sciences, pharmaceuticals, yes, of course, they probably got out front, you would say, because of the complexity of some of their workflows, the regulatory aspects. But a lot of innovation is happening now across sectors, consumer products, retail, automotive. So working with a lot of really amazing in-house teams have been thinking about this for a long time. And I know we'll talk about this as well, but I think a lot of power is really joining up at the enterprise. So I'm seeing a lot of real success where, it's legal, it's procurement, it's technology. They have a shared vision. It's really powerful because when you can crack this at an enterprise level, I think that is where you're really going to start to see the outcomes, the ROI, and what Kanti outlined in terms of the technology, what it can accomplish.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's great. Kind of an adjacent type question. Obviously, if the people are out evaluating technology, they're going to have to come up with a business case for this. Given that it's a new technology, like how do you recommend in-house counsels actually produce a business case around generative AI as they're looking at technology purchases?
Yeah, and we have the great privilege to, I think, work with a lot of in-house teams in this regard. I think, we're seeing a lot of those business cases oftentimes start in legal. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, really expand into more of an enterprise view. But oftentimes the legal team, I applaud them because they're kind of getting their house in order, if you will, before they show up to the enterprise approach. So they're thinking around what their workflows are, the efficiencies. Thankfully, there's a lot of benchmarks now and analysis that exists in the market broadly. We know benchmarks are not the end all be all, but it's an important data input for them to start to really study. They have to understand their processes, their headcount, their costs, and then you overlay what we really see as true time savers efficiencies, as we discussed earlier in the session. But the more you can build it out at an enterprise level and bring in other stakeholders, I'm seeing more recently now bringing in teams like internal audit because they're very focused on supplier risk and you mentioned ESG, Gordon, all those other areas, that needs to make its way into the data model. And so really building that up at the outset. And then you come to the realization that, you can merge together a variety of different enterprise budgets, if you will, and technology has to be involved early on as well for all those reasons. So I think there can be a greater impact on the organization if you uplift some of these business cases that often start, in the siloed functions, and that makes sense, but then they expand. And I think that's where a lot of the power comes for the organizations.
No, that's great counsel as far as just aggregating all the different use cases from the various stakeholders and coming up with that business case would be great. I think we have another poll. So what is your greatest area of concern when it comes to implementing generative AI? Any guesses before all the answers come in?
I think it'll be between the accuracy, more importantly, the explainability of outcomes and security. Anyone could win.
What about you, Heidi?
I concur with that. I think that I would say emerging is cost. I will say that that connects back to the ROI and the business cases. I do see that as a big driver. But in terms of the concerns, I agree with Kanti. Those first two definitely seem to be prevailing with a lot of the organizations we're working with.
Yeah. And let's just face it, we've seen several articles over the past year where someone has used generative AI, not for good, but for evil, and have gotten
Right.
caught. So it's definitely something that accuracy and explainability is a core tenet of any in-house counsel using this technology. So looks like the surveys are slowing down, and I think you guys guessed right. So accuracy and explainability is number one, data and privacy is number two, AI governance and regulatory and legal tied, and then cost, ironically, is very last. So fantastic input. Thanks everyone for participating in the poll. As we kind of move into some additional questions here, and this is for Kanti and for Heidi, and you guys can both chime in on this, but how do you get started? What are the important considerations when formulating your enterprise generative AI strategy? So Heidi, do you want to start with that one maybe?
Sure, absolutely. We do have probably not surprising, a framework for this and how we're helping clients think through this. It definitely just starts with discovery. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there's a varying level of knowledge around this topic in the marketplace, probably within your own organization. So we see a lot of legal teams even just beginning the journey with discovery, a lot of education, a lot of workshops. This might already be happening within your organization. They're understanding just the GenAI acts, the rules, the regulations, which again is related to a lot of the legal work that's already underway, and just some of the key concepts. There's a lot of education that's happening. What is prompt engineering? What does the tool landscape really mean? And so that's a lot of what we're doing with organizations and clients too. And so that's kind of an outside in perspective, but then you move quickly into assessing. So taking stock of what you have. And I think oftentimes, as we discussed earlier, you're not starting from scratch. There's things that you can leverage. Do you have to understand your data quality, very quickly, your data model, probably within the department. We're building a lot of what we describe as common data models. So that's where the legal team can really look across the landscape and traverse technology and use cases, include CLM, looking at workflows and just ultimately what the strategy is of the department. It quickly moves into just building out use cases, monitoring those, understanding what can happen in terms of automation, and then moving into just mitigating any risks, any feedback loops that would happen as you would start to roll things out. And then finally, beginning to see transformation realized. And that's where you have a lot of the tools implemented and so forth. But, where are people at in the market? They're still discovering, they're assessing. As I mentioned earlier, we're getting some of those, POCs off the assembly line, thinking about enterprise deployment. So somewhat still early in the stage, but a lot of optimism, I think, in terms of the outcomes.
Yeah, that's great. Kanti, what are your thoughts on, what should people consider as they're formulating their generative AI strategy?
I would want to keep it simple. One, choose a strategy that allows you to trust the models used. Make sure that, and trust comes in different forms, that you understand, where the data is going, where is your data being used? Is your data being used to make the model better, which is a no-no? Is your data being held securely? So can you trust the security aspect of the solution? Second, can you trust the answers that a model gives you? Now, there are two ways to trust. You review each answer and then you figure it out. The second, which many systems make easier, is explainability. Instead of just giving you an answer, if you can get a very clear understanding of how was that answer derived, the references that were used, a natural language summarization of why that particular risk was identified, that builds trust. And last, I think a key consideration is cost. Many a times, and this happens regularly, that GenAI has hidden costs where one gets very excited about a solution, gets into it, and very quickly, the number of tokens put in or the number of questions asked start hiking up the bill. So it is important to understand, what models are being used, what is the pricing mechanism, where is it hosted, what are the ways in which you can extrapolate the success of a use case, and therefore keeping cost as one of the key elements in mind as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's a related question here, Kanti. I'll go ahead and throw it out now because I think it's appropriate based on the three areas that you just covered. But there's a question from Jen that says there's been some fear around whether utilization of generative AI creates risk to orgs if their agreements are used to train the models. Is this a reasonable fear, and how do you mitigate that risk?
It's a very reasonable fear, and one should choose a solution that does not use your data to train. One should choose a solution where the models come pre-trained, they come fine-tuned with models or with data that the CLM system has used, and your data is held very securely within your environment, and it is only being used in order to answer questions. So it is a key part of the IT review that you would do, and to be able to understand the answer from multiple perspectives, so you're very clear where your data is going.
Yeah, and just going off script a little bit here, Kanti, as people are looking at technologies, I mean, how do they know based on the technologies they're looking at whether or not their content's being used to train? Is that a reasonable question to ask a vendor?
Absolutely. I think knowing where the model is hosted is a key question. Knowing where your data is hosted, knowing when a question is asked, what is the route the data takes. All of these are critical questions to be understood and answered before one goes ahead with a decision of using AI and CLM.
Yeah, that's great. Good input. So moving to another question here, and this is for Heidi. How does generative AI impact an organization's contracting maturity?
I think what we're seeing right now, and it's still, as we discussed early, in terms of implementations, how we see teams using it to its fullest extent. But I think it will only, as we discussed, automate, enhance, and streamline processes, particularly with some of the examples that Kanti and I touched on, very specific examples. And so, again, seeing it definitely becoming a standard, and also something that you can tie actual concrete, KPIs, metrics to for the business case. So we're helping a lot of teams really flesh out, specifics around cycle time, specifics around end to end in terms of that transparency that otherwise you wouldn't have from an agreement from pre-execution all the way through to post-execution. And then also, I think the value around obligations management and just everything that what happens start to finish. And so I think it definitely will disrupt what otherwise is, the proverbial it's stuck in legal, is a lot of the lawyers that we work with often hear and face. It sheds some real transparency on that, and often shows that, as you look at the playbook, which is now will be guided through technology, right? And so that automation will allow, multiple parts of the organization who work in a given agreement be able to have those handoffs happen more seamlessly. So definitely see it as bringing those efficiencies for all the reasons that we've outlined so far.
That's great. And kind of a related question, Kanti, how can generative AI potentially advance an organization's CLM journey?
Actually, it's so fascinating. Like Heidi said, sometimes we're seeing maturity, and it's not a linear journey. We are seeing organizations almost, jumping and moving ahead phases of maturity with the use of GenAI, and with the careful choice of the type of models to be used and the problems that they would like to solve. So definitely see a huge impact of GenAI technology, if implemented correctly, in leapfrogging transformation sometimes, and with a very solid architecture, a process and outcomes that you would like to have.
That's great. So Kanti, there's a bunch of questions coming in. I'm going to go ahead and ask it now because I think it's related to the prior question. But you mentioned that you don't want to ingest customers' data into your models to do the training. The questions are coming up. Well, how does Sirion train our models today? Do you want to shed some light on that?
Sure. So we train, we've had AI infused into Sirion for, I think, 8 years now. And over the years, we've created a very, strong corpus of pristine, publicly available, as well as curated, purchased contract data, which we've tagged and which we've trained over time. And just like any other AI, GenAI also relies on, on good training, on good data. And while the large language model will have its own brain, fine-tuning it with right contextual data is important too. And so we use our, data set curated over several years, and we do not therefore need to use customer data in order to train the model because it comes pre-trained or fine-tuned with this corpus that we've been working on for a while.
That's great. It's great. Kind of shifting here, Heidi, looking at the EY implementations and knowing we're early in the cycle here, what does success look like for an organization that wants to adopt generative AI?
Yeah, no, great question. I think when we look across the portfolio, 3 themes emerge, I would say, if someone's thinking about, what are we going to do? What would set us up for success as we embark on this journey? I would say the first is just the governance and the organizational alignment and not forgetting about that. We see a lot of implementations go awry because, guiding principles were not shared, communication plans were not set. A lot of these deployments, they, transcend budgets, reporting lines. As I said, they're at an enterprise level. So really thinking about that organizational alignment as you embark on the journey. And the second would be, I would say, to balance both long-term goals and short-term successes. So these endeavors are often, sometimes multi-year journeys, particularly on the enterprise level. And so we see a lot of teams really thinking strategically about the long-term plan, but when you go forward with a pilot or you think about the first few workflows you're going to launch, being really thoughtful on that, making sure there's success, there's gains, there's that feedback loop back in so that you won't ever get that, newness of the system from the user at the pilot perspective back. And so just making sure that you're really thinking about user adoption that hits on the people aspect, the personas, all of that really, really important as part of it. And then the final one is just that recognizing this is a journey. It's often a multi-year journey and that you have the change management and the communication strategy to back that up for sure. I would say that has become a very clear indicator in terms of having all the right governance, the technology, the legal teams, and so on, all set up for success. So I would say that those are probably some guiding principles for success overall that we've seen organizations really start to think through.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. So let's kind of shift gears here a little bit, and what legal counsels should look for in a generative AI solution. And I'm going to use kind of a slang term here, but discerning the pretenders versus the players in this space, because everybody claims they have generative AI. You can't go onto a website without someone saying they have generative AI capabilities. Kanti, give us some guidance here on how to kind of filter through all the noise that we're hearing right now.
Sure. I think 2 key points I would want to put here. One, the ability to bet on players who understand not just that GenAI is a magic bullet and will solve all use cases, but understand that GenAI solves some use cases, and unless the player has a multi-year history of dealing with NLP models, dealing with small and medium language models, dealing with different types of models solving different problems, the ability to have a successful GenAI outcome is limited. And therefore, it's important to choose players with a history or a deep success in terms of delivering AI outcomes. And the second is always, first principles, asking the how. How does the system redline this clause? Where is the intelligence coming from? Where does the system know what are the provisions that I find favorable versus the counterparty? Is it generic? Or is this something that I need to train on or I need to provide? asking those questions so that one understands that this is not just, a chat GPT plugged in onto your contract where the data is flowing in different directions and it is just giving you a generic answer, but is it giving you a honed, trained answer? So I think those two would be, areas definitely to explore.
Yeah, that's great guidance. Heidi, because you're on the implementation side and you consult with a lot of different companies, what are some of the top 2 or 3 questions that, the attendee should ask if they're talking to a technology vendor today to determine if they're going to be a good fit for delivering generative AI to them?
No, I agree with a lot of what Kanti outlined, and I would say those are similar questions a lot of our clients ask. I think in addition to just understanding how it works, where it works, can they get access to, sandboxes, information? A lot of teams are, during the selection process, really rolling up their sleeves and really doing that diligence. I would say beyond just really understanding and educating themselves, really understanding also a technology platform's roadmap, strategy, future forward. So these are really big investments that organizations are making. They have to make sure that not only can they support them now with the models, but to Kanti's point, where the investment's happening, making sure you're working with someone that can help you look around the corner of what you're going to be needing in the next several years in terms of a deployment strategy and different models, and stress testing that. So and that even comes to just looking at the organization overall, the tech platform, where they operate, who they're owned by. So I think all of that in combination, we see the buyers becoming far more sophisticated, which I think is exciting because, again, these are big investments and big bets for organizations. So a lot to decide and think through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's amazing. We've already gone through a whole hour. I think we could go probably 2 or 3 hours on this one topic, but obviously we have a time limit here. Just 30 seconds, closing comments, Kanti, Heidi, on, if you had one thing to tell the audience, what would it be?
I would echo what Heidi said. This is a journey. There are a lot of very fascinating outcomes that we should be, looking at, but evaluating very carefully. And, going a little slow so that you can run fast later is probably the core principle here.
Yeah, I echo that. And I think, simply put, if it's done right, if it's done thoughtfully, transformation will be worth it. It'll be realized. And so I think that's what a lot of organizations, see that as a far-reaching goal. But if you kind of break it down into its component parts, particularly on an implementation, not only will it be worth it, it'll be really required, to operate in the next several years in terms of, how you go to market as a team for contracting. So it's exciting.
It is very exciting. So Kanti, Heidi, thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences today. It's been super helpful. And Shai, I'll hand it back over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Gordon. What a wonderful presentation panel. What a wonderful discussion. Folks, if you enjoyed the program, please let us know in the chat. Feel free to take our survey poll so we can pass on feedback to the panelists. But I thought this was an excellent presentation. The chat, it was a very active bench, I would say. We're not judges, we're in-house lawyers, but there's still a lot of great questions. So thank you, Gordon. Fantastic job. Maybe when I'll take more vacation, you can host In-House Connect, if you're looking for a second career. Of course, folks, please let us know if you're interested in a demo with Sirion or getting more information. There's tons of information or tons of interest out there. So I'd love to help make a connection, but we'll sign off here. Thank you again, Gordon, Heidi, and Kanti. It was a wonderful, wonderful program. And thank you for sharing your insights.